Welcome back to the NIL Era podcast. My name is Elise Byun.
And I'm Fernando Andrade. Today we have a very, very special guest with us who we are genuinely just really interested to learn from and that we think will offer just such a unique insight into the crazy world of college athletics at the moment.
I am so excited to welcome and introduce the author of 3-Win Sponsorship, The Next Generation of Sports and Entertainment Marketing, founder of Third Win Group, and the director of Georgetown's collective Hoyas Rising, John Balkam. John, welcome to the NIL Era podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
John, just to get started, I mean, we already talked a bit on the phone, but to just provide some context to our listeners, could you tell us a bit about Third Win Group and what the mission is behind the Third Win mindset?
Sure. So we're now in year 6 of Third Win Group, which is kind of incredible. But our whole mission is to serve mission-driven talent and organizations in the sports entertainment industry and now beyond. And so we're, an agency that was born, right before and during the pandemic. So we're remote first, but we're really trying to bring a win-win-win mindset into sports entertainment. And for us, that means how can we operate our business in such a way where not only are we creating value for our partners, but we're creating value for our communities, we're creating value for society, and we're not detracting, right? We're not making it so that somebody else has to lose so that we win, right? We feel like our industry, our business is not a zero-sum game. We don't need to tear people down. And in fact, we can lift people up through the power of sports and entertainment. So that was really the thesis of the book. And then, I was really creative and just kind of took the thesis of the book and tried to apply it to the business. And so far, so good. So that's really what we're about and why TWG we feel is a little bit different. Now, of course, we're seeing, everyone talking about purpose-driven marketing these days as well. But I think our difference is we kind of started there from day one. We took a blank sheet of paper and said, what would an agency in sports entertainment look like if we could build it exactly the way we wanted? And so that's what me, my business partner, our associates, our partners and clients have come up with. So yeah, it's been an exciting run so far and really grateful to have survived all of the craziness. But we're excited for the future at TWG.
Awesome. So transitioning from there, from creating TWG to now being the director of Hoyas Rising, which is one of the official collectives of Georgetown Athletics, can you explain what your role with Hoyas Rising looks like in practice and how TWG helped you in this new collective space?
Yeah, so I'm a Georgetown alum, and in the fall of 2022, I got a call from our president, Tim Brosnan, and he said a few things. He said, I need someone who's in DC. I prefer that they're an alum. I prefer that they have sports marketing experience, and it would be helpful if you have an entrepreneurial background. And so I said, you've come to the right place. I'll check those boxes for you. And so that's how I got, I'm still operating TWG with my team, but that's how I was introduced to the role for Hoyas Rising. So the reason it was a good fit is, some of those things that I mentioned, but really Hoyas Rising, and I think collectives in general, it's an easy way to think about them is they're like agencies, but they just specifically serve the student athletes at a specific university. So a lot of my work translated over, right? And my experiences translated over. Also, that entrepreneurial energy that you need to bring when you start something new. You all started this podcast. You've been doing an entrepreneurial endeavor yourself. So there is a lot that goes into it of just uncertainty. You're starting with few resources and a blank sheet of paper, and you've got to figure stuff out. So yeah, that's probably why I was a good fit. And what does my role look like? I just do whatever needs to get done, right? I'm on campus or just off campus. I have an office so that I can go and interact with the teams, with the players, with the coaches on a moment's notice. I'm also organizing events. I'm working with sponsors. I'm working with all kinds of different people. And I think one thing about Hoyas Rising, and I would venture to say lots of collectives, oftentimes very small teams, and we are a very small team. I'm full time. Our president Tim Brosnan's full time. We have part time student interns. We have a board of directors, but that's pretty much it. And of course, we do interact and work hand in hand with a lot of folks in the university and the athletic department. But it is kind of a startup, right? So just wear a bunch of different hats, get stuff done, and show up every day and try and do make things happen. That would be my job description.
So we've actually done an episode here on the podcast talking about just collectives in general. It was episode 9. And just talking about the dialogue around collectives. And there's plenty of different narratives, which doesn't really, it's always interesting to hear what different schools are doing. So you're talking about Georgetown at the moment. There's the horror stories from like UNLV or, with the QB1 situation that happened, allegedly just not signing a contract. There's collective directors being involved, sometimes tampering in the portal, all these different things. But you're describing something that sounds completely different. Like it's, I don't know, a bit more, not relaxed, but just smaller and very hands-on in your role. So from your experience, what are more of these good things that we don't see in the headlines? Because it's always going to be the negatives making the headlines. But where are the positives of these interactions that you're having with coaches, teams, etc.?
All right. So what I would say about NIL is that it's a really exciting opportunity for student athletes. That has never been the case, at least in the United States. And so my overall comment about NIL, it is a massively positive development for young people in this country who play sports, right? It essentially took the rights that only professional athletes had up till 2021, and it opened them up and it offered them up to collegiate athletes. So we can get into like the nitty gritty about, money's only going to certain players or it's going to more to certain players versus others. I think we should take the win, okay? And the win is young people now have the freedom, the opportunity to capitalize on their name, image, and likeness, to take their good name and their reputation and build a business around it. And seeing that and then seeing the impact on the players and sometimes their families, where maybe they automatically, just by nature of being a top college player, they automatically become the highest earner in their family at 18 or 19 years old. Think about the families whose total trajectory gets changed. And there's also more players because, in the past, only professional athletes would get paid at a very high level. Now we just have a lot more athletes getting paid, maybe not at the professional level, but a level below, a very competitive rate. So that's what I would say on the overall positive note. And also the learning that goes on when you start to do NIL business, right? I like to say that the best way to learn business is to do business. And so when you are 17, 18 years old, you're being recruited, there's this new layer on it. In addition to, are you right fit for the school and the team and the coaching staff and all of that playing time, there's a new layer of, well, we need to negotiate here, right? Either with a collective or, negotiate with an agent who will negotiate on your behalf. And so there's a lot of learning that goes on that truly is beneficial to the athletes, right? Because end of the day, if you don't go pro in sports, you're probably going to have to go negotiate a contract with an employer when you're 22 or 23. So that learning by doing and experiencing, getting a taste of the business world is a huge positive, and I think is helping this generation of athletes get useful experience that will pay off for them, whether they go professional in sports or not.
Do you think on the flip side that there are any negatives when it comes to NIL besides the obvious of the exploitation factors? Like Do you see any negatives with this experience now for student athletes?
I think we're seeing them play out, right? And that part of it is that because it is so new, the frontier tends to attract some interesting characters, right? On any given frontier, you're going to find some bandits, right? You're going to find some people who don't have your best interest at heart, or who maybe will pull the wool over your eyes, or maybe renege on a deal. And look, that happens in other industries too, but it tends to happen more in new industries, and it tends to happen more on like what we call frontier industries. So those are some of the negatives. And what I'm seeing is like, people are not holding up their end of the bargain and promising a certain deal and then not delivering on that deal. You mentioned the UNLV quarterback, right? He just so happened to have the guts to leave and then go to the press with that story. But how many other stories are there like that we don't hear about, where such and such a player was promised a certain amount, but it was only a handshake deal, and then when the rubber hit the road, they weren't able to deliver? Well, there's probably way more stories. We just haven't heard about them because they haven't been out there in the media. So yeah, I would say it's a frontier type subsection of the sports industry, and it's high risk, high reward. That's what I would say. So plenty of negatives, but just being in it and living it, I just feel overall very positive of the direction. And it won't stay a frontier forever, right? Eventually, the sheriff comes into town and starts to clean up, some of the bandits, right? And, the town people come in and they clean up the town, and now all of a sudden it's a new town, it's a new city. It's not the Wild Wild West anymore, right? So I think in a couple more years, we won't be saying Wild Wild West about NIL anymore. We'll just be saying, oh, remember those crazy first 4 or 5 years of NIL? Those were wild. Remember when they promised Jaden Rashada $13.5 million to play quarterback at Miami? Well, or Florida, I don't remember which one. Crazy how that all happened, right? Well, in the first 0 to 5 years of any frontier, stuff like that happens. And yeah, we'll iron some of that out as we go along and as we start to develop this a bit more.
In these 0 to 5 years, though, while it is still a Wild West, because eventually, like you said, I think it won't be. And when there's potentially federal laws around this, everything will change as well, besides like not having 50 different laws statewide, right? But in these 0 to 5 years, do you think it's a net positive for collectives just to be involved in every single school because it's genuinely a good thing for athletes? Like the mission behind it is good? Or is it because teams just wouldn't be competitive without them nowadays?
I think there's some truth to both of those statements. I just think that here's my observation. These are academic institutions who are mostly nonprofit, right? In fact, almost all of them are nonprofit. And their model has always been some combination of revenue from admissions, donations from alumni, and then either corporate grants or federal grants, right? That's been their business model for decades now, right? And they've run athletic departments inside these institutions for a long time as well. But they had never had to pay the players. The players were never on the payroll, right? And so that just threw a wrench into the whole system. And you all of a sudden, you go from, all right, your budget is X to run your athletic department and run a football program, basketball program, and all of the different programs you run. It goes from X to X times 3 or X times 5. And you don't just find that money overnight, right? Any business, it's very, very difficult to grow 3X, 5X in a couple of years, right? So, for lack of a better term, these collectives are business people coming in to help out, right? Help the cause, right? People who have training in sponsorship and sports marketing and negotiations and everything are coming in because I think my overall observation is that NIL is basically a story about professionalizing college sports. And so you're seeing lots of people who have experience from the big properties, the big leagues, the big agencies who have the experience in doing this type of work being brought over and now professionalizing the operations in the back of the house type of stuff for this. So, yeah, I mean, overall, like, why is this such a big topic and why is this such a sea change? It's because we decided decades ago to put these college sports programs inside of academic institutions. Over in Europe, they don't do this. In most other parts of the world, they don't do it this way. Student athlete is not a thing, except for in the US. And now that we've done it for so long, we love college sports, right? So many of us grew up on it, so many great memories, so many great moments. The idea that we would separate student and athlete in the United States seems like a very foreign idea. Why would we do that? Oh, the education, oh, this, that, or the other. That's mostly just nostalgia speaking. In other parts of the world, in Europe, they're like, what are you guys doing over there? Like, if you're a great football player, just sign a contract when you're a teenager. Just go be a football player, right? So it's just going to take some time for us to go through this transition. But look, I think what's going to happen is that it's going to start to look a little bit more like the model around the world, right? You can essentially go pro in football, basketball, and in some other sports, but it's going to probably still go through the college system just because that's our infrastructure. That's how we set up our system in the U.S. Will there be some moaning and groaning and, I remember the good old days when, the left tackle for our football team used to be in my math class, but hey, does he really need to go take calculus to protect the quarterback's blind side? That's just me, guys, but I don't think he does. I think he just needs to be a great football player.
Yeah, I think that offers some really interesting perspective in terms of just the transition and honestly the history of how this all came about. And I think that wild, wild west environment that we're in is something we've grown to get comfortable in this uncomfortableness of the landscape. And I think we've also learned how every collective runs very differently from one another. So, can you explain the process of how a Georgetown specific student athlete can get involved with Hoyas Rising and what Hoyas Rising offers these student athletes in practice?
Sure. So I don't know how everybody else is operating, but I feel like we're relatively buttoned up in that we're open to any and all Georgetown student athletes. And we actually have a contract that you can sign that enables Hoyas Rising to essentially represent, like, take your name, image, and likeness rights and put it into our group licensing pool, so to speak. So as of right now, I think we have probably about 300 total student athletes at Georgetown who are in our collective. And all that means is that we have the right to include all 300 of them in a deal. Let's say Comcast wanted to do a deal with every single one of our student athletes. Well, if you're a part of our collective, if you signed our contract, we can include you in that deal. You can still say yes or no to the deal. You can opt in or opt out, but that gives us the right to negotiate and include you and put you in front of different opportunities, and you can say yes or no. So that's one piece of it, right? We have this legal entity where we can essentially be your agent, but rather than representing you, the individual, which is the model in professional sports, we're representing you and everyone else at Georgetown that wants to be a part of Hoyas Rising and take part in these potential opportunities. So it's representing you from like marketing and sponsorship opportunities. In some cases, it is creating NIL events and opportunities on campus where we'll either have you help you interact with your fan base, alumni, fellow students. We'll help you um, create content, right? Hey, we know that advertisers, they love working with individuals, whether you're an athlete or not, who have a large following on social media. We'll help you with that. Um, I guess overall, it's like we're your business partner in NIL. That would be the simple, straightforward pitch. If you want to come in and basically create a plan or a strategy for NIL while you're at Georgetown, I'm the person. I was just meeting with an athlete today who's a freshman, just getting started. Hey, what do I need to know? How do I get started? How do I make the most of my opportunities while I'm on campus? So, business partner, advisor, liaison, marketing agent, that would be kind of the different roles or services that we provide. And overall, right, we just want to make sure that we're setting up our athletes not only for success during the 4 years while they're at Georgetown, but then beyond. Again, if you really want to dive into it, you can learn a ton about business doing NIL. So come in, learn with us, work with us, do deals with us. And that's one of the other, the main things that we've done is connected our student athletes with even small businesses down the street, right? Even though they might not be huge revenue generating deals, they're still experience, and they're, any kind of revenue is more than what they were previously getting. So yeah, that's a brief overview. And again, I think this is just, we're in year 2 and not even fully through year 2. So it'll be cool to see how we evolve and how we grow in the coming years as well.
Definitely. I love that perspective of collectives as a business partner. And I think that just shows your passion specifically about athletes as entrepreneurs. So, how do you balance the interests of businesses, athletes, and the university when you're creating these NIL partnerships? And how do you foster that trust with athletes, like you just said, of meeting with a student athlete earlier today, to ensure that the NIL opportunities align with their personal values and goals long term?
Well, that's the trick, isn't it, Elise? Right? I think it helps that I've had experience putting deals like this together, and I have 20 plus clients that we serve over at TWG, where pretty much the same type of process. I've been doing that and learning how to meet the athlete where they are. I didn't play varsity when I was at Georgetown, but I've always been involved in sports and in the industry. So, and I've been an athlete of varying degrees of success throughout my life. So, I think part of it is just trying to understand where the athlete is today, where they want to go, and don't assume that they have the same experience, understanding that you do, and try and meet them where they are. I know that's an overused term, but I think it makes sense to think of it as a progression and a development process. Just like the coaches are taking you when you're a freshman, you're a ball of clay at 18 years old, and hopefully you stay at least 2-3 years, hopefully 4 years, but it's a development process, right? And the same goes for business. The same goes for NIL. Like, we're trying to help them learn along the way, be there by their side as they're learning, but also like go and make things happen whenever possible. So my job and our whole thing at Hoyas Rising is we're serving the student athlete first and foremost, right? The other stakeholders, right? The university athletic department, the corporate brands that we work with, the fans, they all have people advocating for them, or they're advocating for themselves. Our job is to advocate for the student athlete first and foremost. So that's what I focus on. is getting good opportunities and good deals and good terms for Georgetown student athletes that we serve. But going back to what we talked about earlier, a great deal is when you at least win-win, if not win-win-win, right? In an ideal world. So again, we have to have something of value that companies, fans, boosters, university, the athletic department, we need to create transactions where value is being exchanged, right? And so a lot of times we're talking about marketing. And so how do we increase marketing value of our student athletes, right? A big part of it is performance, but then there's other things that we can help them with and help them improve that will increase their marketing value. Posting on a more regular basis, right? Being unique and creative and trying different things that aren't out there in the marketplace. I like to say that different is better than better. And I try and impress upon our athletes that you really don't need to try and be better than somebody else. You just need to be you and be different. And you may not be the most successful, but you will be more successful than if you try and compete with somebody else, right? So I might have been rambling a little bit there, but I think what we're going for is, all right, our mandate is helping the student athlete at Georgetown while they're there, setting them up, and ultimately helping them increase their market value and then capitalize on their market value, right? That's really the crux of it. And I think, it's not a overstatement to say that at Georgetown, when our basketball program goes, the whole program goes. So it shouldn't be a surprise. We definitely put a little bit more of an emphasis on basketball. But I've also worked with women's lacrosse. I've worked with women's volleyball. I've worked with soccer. I've worked with football. I've worked with athletes in all different sports. I just think at Georgetown, oftentimes you aren't going to Georgetown to become a big, make a bunch of money on NIL, right? And that's okay. If you're coming to play tennis or golf or field hockey at Georgetown, are you really going to, become wealthy off of NIL? And what's the path to get you there, right? I like to be very transparent and honest. It's a difficult path for a lot of athletes, and you kind of have to stick with the realities of the market and you can't wish your way to wealth anywhere, but particularly not in NIL. You've got to go out and earn it, and you have to create a path for yourself. So, yeah, that's a couple different stream of consciousness thoughts, but we're building something that was never there in Georgetown before. It's something brand new, and we feel really good about what we've done so far and the way that we've been able to help out the community.
An idea I've been really fascinated by overall, and it goes back to what you were talking about on how to market your athletes. I think that the only shortcut to success in this world is found at the intersection where your strengths can shine the most, but you have the least amount of competition, which goes back to the don't be better, just be different. And my question here is, and I was fascinated by this when he talked about it on our Connect call prior to recording, that there's three types of athletes. There's the athlete, there's the creative, and then there's the creative athlete. How do you identify this, and what are you seeing in Georgetown? Because at least at Cal, there's definitely the big name athletes, but then there's some student athletes that are nowhere close to even the top of their team or even competing. There's some that have never competed, and they're the leaders in NIL space because of their creative side. So what are you seeing there?
Yeah, well, you hit on it, right? The name of the game is how do you stand out? How do you stand out? Carve a lane for yourself, carve a niche for yourself. And yeah, the categories that I've observed are you're a performance athlete, you're a creative athlete, or you're a creative performance athlete. And if you think about it, the most common path is to try and go and be the performance athlete, right? And what I mean by that is you're known for your performance on the field, court, rink, pool, etc. You're known for winning championships, scoring lots of points or goals, being one of the very best in your sport. And that's the traditional route, and that's the most common route. We're seeing this new route, which is the creative athlete. That's more of the influencer, the content creator. You're creating and publishing a ton of content on the internet, Instagram, TikTok. You find your niche, you find some unique quirk about you and your personality that stands out, and you just run with it, and you're publishing all the time. You just so happen to be a college athlete, but you use that platform to essentially become a content creator and influencer. And that's why you're seeing some of the highest earners in NIL. Maybe they aren't even starters, right? I think one of the top performers in year 1 and 2 was this guy who played offensive line for Elon University. And he basically did stand-up bits into his cell phone. And he was hilarious. And that's how he grew his following, right? And offensive linemen are often very funny. So I think he nailed that, right? I think he figured out a great way to show his personality, but he's an example of the creative athlete. Then I think the most rare, and the most difficult path, but the most lucrative path, is to be the performance creative athlete or creative performance athlete, which is both. Not only you're winning championships, absolutely dominating in your sport, you're also publishing and creating a ton of content. You have the huge following, you're winning championships, and then you have the charisma and the entertainment capability to back it all up. And think like Angel Reese as an example of this third category. And you saw her blow up, right? Because when you can match performance with charisma and creativity and, let's be honest, like acting chops, right, and entertainment skills, the world is your oyster, right? So I even talked to this athlete who was in my office today about this, and I laid it out for him, and he was like, that makes perfect sense. And he didn't pick a path right then and there, but I said, you're a freshman. Think about what path you want to go here. Do you want to just try and focus on performance? Do you want to focus on creative, or a little bit of both? I think I know what his coach would say, and coaches are almost always going to want their athletes to focus on performance, but the reality is that some will take a different path, and it's cool that we're seeing this generation of athletes embrace it, and we're also getting a ton of cool different perspectives and cool different entertainment pieces, and let's see where it goes, right? I think when it comes right down to it, NIL is an entrepreneurial endeavor, and being an athlete is an entrepreneurial endeavor. And so the more energy you put into the business side, the more that you're going to get out of it, right? The more energy you put into your sport itself, the more you're going to get out of it. So if you feel like you can be a full-time student and a full-time athlete and a full-time content creator, you're probably going to work 80 to 100 hours a week, but you can have outsized impact and you can make incredible amounts at a young age. And that's, I think, what we're witnessing. We've already seen the first few stars of the NIL era appear. Very, very. I'm sure your audience is very familiar with some of those names. Who's going to be next, right? And I think this paradigm of this kind of frame that I've realized is like this is what you can basically choose one of these paths, or maybe even create a path that I haven't mentioned. But these are 3 paths that you can think about and maybe choose if you're just entering college right now.
That's just fascinating to me. I love the idea of athletes being the new creatives, and yeah, it's an entire connection between those 3. To go back to your point on freshmen being this ball of clay for coaches, and in this case in the NIL space, I'm curious as to what role you believe collectives should play in the educating of athletes about financial literacy, contract negotiations, and overall long-term brand building. Because it's one thing to believe that it's the right thing to do, but do you think it's the responsibility of the collective to do so?
Well, I think in an ideal world, yes. In an ideal world, it would be great to include that in the offering, the services. But I would emphasize again that we are essentially startups trying to make it. We're trying to survive just like every other company out there. And we need to grow our revenues and we need to manage our business effectively to continue to be able to service the university, the student athletes, right? So I think that's something we can improve on. And I think it would probably make sense for collectives to be a part of that. I think it'll vary from school to school though, right? And you've got to spend so much time raising money, whether it be from donors or corporate sponsors. You're really always trying to drive revenue. That's your main focus in addition to serving the student athlete. That, hey, if you've got two people running a collective, how much time do you have and how much bandwidth do you have to play that role in financial literacy? But fortunately, what I'm seeing is that, at least for some athletes, they're starting to hire their team and on that team includes a financial advisor. So they're not completely in the dark. Oftentimes they're hiring an agent, they're hiring a lawyer, they're hiring, financial advisor, and they're ready to go. They've got their team by the time they get to campus. So that's an encouraging thing of like we're already starting to see some college athletes get a team around them. Hopefully they're trusted and hopefully they're professional and been well vetted. But that's a piece of the puzzle, and maybe the financial literacy part will end up sitting with the collectives. But I know that athletic departments are also providing some programming. So, for example, at Georgetown, I think Invesco QQQ came in and sponsored Georgetown Athletics, and they do run financial literacy programming with the athletic department. So it's happening in different ways. And I also think that a certain element of like learning by doing and experiencing, I'm clearly a big advocate for that. But there's a difference between kind of like learning the theory of financial literacy and then actually having money hit your bank account and then making decisions on how I'm going to divvy this up, right? I think that's where you really learn, um, okay, how many taxes am I going to pay? Should I take out loans or not? Should I go buy this car or not? Should I go rent this glitzy apartment or not? And ultimately, I think it will work itself out. And there's much better infrastructure in place for athletes today than say 30 or 40 years ago, when you would hear a lot more stories about athletes, getting too far over their skis, having to declare bankruptcy, et cetera, et cetera. There are very, very, very savvy athletes in this day and age. And I think they're taking after the generation right in front of them that is a very business savvy, entrepreneurial generation of athletes as well.
And just on the securing the deals, and because you have so many roles and it's only two of you full time, so it's just wild to me to see how this could all even work out, just time wise, right? Resources wise. It's interesting that you mentioned that some deals are already taking place by team. In this case, you mentioned potentially financial literacy or lawyers just being hired entirely for a team. And then in your previous example of Comcast, you talked about, everybody that's already signed in gets the option to participate in this deal. Is that a strategy you guys use, or what's the strategy at Hoyas Rising to secure these deals and partnerships for your student athletes?
Yeah, look, I think part of it comes from, who have we worked with in the past, right? And certainly I have certain companies and certain connections that I've made just by being in the business and by building what I've been building at TWG. And look, sometimes there is no overlap and the audience that the sponsor's looking for doesn't overlap between clients and what you're doing, but sometimes there is, and sometimes that works out really well. I would also say that you kind of I basically started by going door to door. There's two main roads next to Georgetown, M Street and Wisconsin Avenue. And when I first started last fall, I started by going door to door to all the businesses, the retail on M Street and Wisconsin Avenue. So I think you start at the local level, literally who's in our neighborhood. Then you probably go up to the regional level. Okay, what companies are really, really, dominant and wanting to have a dominant position here regionally, and then you can work your way back, all the way up to the really big corporations. And the other thing is, I think with that, like any salesperson, it's a combination of like who are the incumbents who are already spending a lot in our market and who would be a great fit for us, but also looking at like who are the newcomers, who hasn't necessarily spent before, but that it would make a ton of sense based on who their audience is and who their customer is for them to come in and work with us. So it's been a cool balance of like, oh, well, there's all these amazing, fashion and retail and food brands that are literally right down the street. I mean, DC and Georgetown is a really great market, period, for businesses. But then there's an element of like, I just met with a tech company that's working on a device that's going to help athletes moderate their body temperature during competition and lower their body temperature so that they can finish games and perform well deep into games. And it's like, how cool is that, right? That makes sense. We've got all these athletes, right? Let's tee them up and not only think about the value we can bring from a monetary perspective, but how do we help them perform better with partnerships that we bring to the table? That's the cool part to me, and where I think sports sponsorships is at its best is this makes a ton of sense from the brand from a marketing perspective, and it makes a ton of sense for the athlete just from a pure performance recovery training perspective. Like, not every deal has to be a huge dollar amount for it to be a huge success. And so that's been exciting to see that, like, man, there's a ton of innovation going on, and we layer it in with the frontier of NIL, and then you're going to see some stuff you've never seen before when it comes to sports marketing and partnerships.
That's awesome. I think that's also like that 3-win mindset right there of everyone winning, and it doesn't have to be a revenue dollar amount, but just those experiences, those opportunities are great. Kind of circling back to what you mentioned earlier with Georgetown being in the Big East Conference, the reality is basketball is a driver in the conference and then in turn in the university athletic department. So from your role, how do you prioritize which athletes to support more heavily? I don't know if there is those sport specific collectives in place already, but what factors influence those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started, we made a point of saying we're here to serve all Georgetown student athletes, and it is opt in, so we're not, that it's not mandatory for anyone to join, but anyone can join. And so the cool thing for us was that in our first full year, we probably ultimately had more female athletes signed up for the collective than male athletes, which was interesting and exciting. I think it just so happens that women's sports is really big at Georgetown. We have just more activity and more energy coming from our female athletes. Ultimately, though, right, like it comes down to where are the contributions coming from and where are they going to, right? And I don't think it would be a huge surprise that there's a lot of support for basketball at Georgetown, right? And so your donors from the alumni side definitely dictate where you're going to end up spending time and resources. But then also, companies will dictate, it comes down to supply and demand, right? If we offer up our athletes to the marketplace, there has to be another party that comes in and says, I want to buy access to that group of athletes. And what was really cool last year is that our first 2, 3, 4 deals, they actually came from those interactions with businesses right down the street on M Street and Wisconsin Avenue. We worked with a couple different local restaurants. We worked with local retail fashion. And we got female athletes and male athletes deals. And it was one of those things where there was no like prioritization. I wasn't trying to go get a deal for any specific team. I wasn't trying to go get a deal for male athletes or female athletes. We just kind of went out there, saw what the market had to offer, and offered what we could put out there, and that's what we came up with. So, yeah, it's a mixture of you get priorities from your revenue sources, and then you just see what the market tells you, right? And the market is, I think there's a pretty good argument to be made right now that collegiate female athletes are, while they're not getting the, like, shall we say, big time dollars, they're presenting very well on like marketing campaigns and presenting very well to brands as great partners. And so, yeah, that's, you're hearing all of these crazy stories about like football collectives and basketball collectives raising tons of money and spending tons of money. What I'm excited about is that on the NIL front of like pure NIL, pure marketing and sponsorship deals, you know, that's where it's a level playing field, and anybody can go and you know go kill it on social media, go perform well and kill it on social media. You can hire a great team or go do it yourself and go and pursue those deals and put yourself out there. That's where the level playing field is, and brands are definitely responding to how great it is to work with female athletes. So overall, right, like the economics have to make sense, right? That's what, yes, we want things, we want a level playing field. We want things to work out so it's equitable. There's only so much you can do at the end of the day with the economics as they are.
Real quick, just on that point, why do you think that is? What are you like? Is there anything you're seeing besides girls just posting more on social media? Is there a male stigma to posting or getting involved in the marketing space? Like, what is the reasoning? Because you mentioned female athletes being very, very active here, but why aren't the guys being active? It's the same opportunity, right?
Hey, that's a great. I don't know if any of you studied sociology, but that'd be a great sociology study. I think it's probably a matter of capability. Like I think we're all addicted to Instagram, but I think a younger female demographic might be a little bit more addicted to Instagram or over index. And when you're on the platform more, you're more capable on that platform, right? You're able to create more, create better content, get more engagement. So that might be a piece of it. I also think, at least at Georgetown, we have more female students than male students, period. Like our split is, I don't know exactly, it's like 55% female to 45% male at Georgetown. So it may be unique to us. I don't know, the overall numbers, but that's what I've observed, and I think there's just a great, I don't know, there's a great energy around women's sports in general because of recent years and kind of just like incredible stories, incredible personalities, incredible games and tournaments, right? It is on the rise, right? Where we've had big time male sports for a long time. I just think there's a, if you think about growth trajectories, right? Women's sports is in like the first inning or the second inning, whereas a lot of male sports, they've been around for so long that it's like, how much more growth is there? And I think it's very early days of women's sports. It's just a matter of time and a matter of like continuing to just follow the growth trajectory it's already on, and it will get there. Think about like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Think about them being like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, right? And when did those guys come into the league? 40 years ago. Okay. That's how much of a head start the NBA has on the WNBA. Now that they're in the league, they can kind of play that role for women's sports. And then 30, 40 years from now, right, there's going to be a LeBron James, right, who's carrying on that legacy from the female side.
I love that analogy. I think even there with those securing the partnerships and all of that, I think that's like the true NIL side of things. And I think right now, especially in the media, we're seeing collectives being very much so involved in the recruiting process, transfer portal process, things like that. How do you navigate that relationship between the school's like university goals and your collective's objectives? Do you work closely with both athletic department and coaching staff? How do you navigate all those moving parts?
Yeah, some of it's above my pay grade, right? So on a certain level, right, I'm more kind of like executing once certain negotiations take place or certain deals are made, right? So overall, what I can speak to is that, you can't just, a collective would not exist if there wasn't already an athletic department and already sports programs, right? So yes, we have to serve them as well, right? And we get an indication in terms of the value, the NIL value of players by working with the staff at Georgetown, right? Um, I don't know what the future will hold, but I've observed that places like Duke are hiring general managers, right? Again, further trend of the professionalization of college sports. I think the trend will be that eventually these types of negotiations that are taking place at the collective level will go into the athletic department and will be a contract between the student athlete and the university. Will they be employees? I don't know. If they are employees, they'll remember that they'll also have to get benefits. So remember, this is a scholarship plus a pretty large salary plus benefits. At what point do you say as a university, this is too expensive? We can't raise the money, or we don't make enough revenue to be able to afford this. So again, I'm getting a little into my color commentary about things in general, but just this is the logical progression of kind of where we're going, right? How do you separate, right, the player's value for the sports team from their NIL value, right? Should they be separated, or should there just be a contract that recognizes that a lot of the value that a student athlete brings to a university is indeed on the court, and it is not just their marketing NIL value?
It's a mess between what tends to be, true NIL versus the other pay for play loophole, if you will. But I mean, we've even seen it in this week's news, or very recent news this past couple of days, with the Virginia men's basketball head coach Tony Bennett just retiring. I mean, the timing is wild because this happened in October, right? We've talked plenty of men's basketball today for obvious reasons with Georgetown. We've brought up the examples right now with Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, etc. What do you what do you make of this type of news? Because times are changing, and it's from my perspective, it's either you change with the times or it's time to call it quits. After 15 seasons, I think it makes sense to be like, you know what, I'm not. This isn't the game I signed up to play. Is that what you think is going to continue to happen?
So whether NIL came through or not, I think Nick Saban would have retired around this time. But NIL was perhaps a extra excuse to push him over the edge. Jay Wright, you notice, retired about a year before NIL came to the fore, right? I wonder if he knew that this was coming. Tony Bennett was very open and honest about his feelings that he just didn't feel like he was the right person to be the head coach of Virginia men's basketball today. He was certainly the right coach for many, many years in the old model, but he doesn't feel like he's the right person anymore. So it is a very disruptive time in the sport, right? And sometimes the old guard is not the right group and the right leadership to usher in a new era. You need sometimes guys like me, young people who have different perspectives, who grew up in a different era, who see things differently, to come in and usher in that new era. So This is not a surprise at all. It was surprising with timing for Coach Bennett, and I wonder what UVA is going to do with the season about to start. Good luck to our friends at UVA. But yeah, things are going to be okay. That's my overall comment, right? And Tony Bennett had an amazing career. Nick Saban had an amazing career. Lots of coaches who coached in the previous era made a great impact on their players. I think it's just a natural life cycle, but it's accelerating during this phase where we just had this massive Supreme Court case come through. It was like, boom, overnight from June 30th to July 1st. It was like, oh, the whole thing changed. So, look, we're going to see even more radical change for the rest of this decade. And we're probably not even going to recognize the new models that come forward. But I would encourage and I would share from my perspective, this is all very positive change, right? And I'm biased, and I advocate on the side of the student athlete over the institutions. But the student athlete is the main asset in this whole business, right? Without the student athlete, there is no college sports. So in what other industry does the main asset not get at least a portion of the revenue? The answer is none. There are no other industries where that is the case. So what we're going through right now may be tumultuous and maybe disruptive, but what I would argue is it is a very positive disruption. And while there's going to be difficulty and people are going to have to adjust, it is the right thing for us to do. These players should be compensated and should be earning a slice of the revenue. And it's starting to happen, and it will continue to happen. I'm not advocating for radical change. I may have some radical ideas of what we could do, but I realize that it's going to take some time, and we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We'll be able to find our way and be able to make this thing work for everybody. But again, let's not forget what the main cog of the whole machine here is that student athlete. So we need to make sure that whatever the next model is, we're taking very good care of the student athlete, making sure that they earn a reasonable piece of the pie. Because in the past, I get the whole scholarship as compensation model, but it was not an equitable piece of the pie. I think we can agree on that. And so, Tony Bennett is a face of what college sports used to be. And there will be new characters that emerge who will be a face of what the next version of college sports is. And I'm excited to see who some of those individuals are.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. No question, I totally agree with everything you just said. And I think that's a big part of why Fernando and I started this podcast. It's educating student athletes on what's happening in this landscape because change is coming. And it's how do you be a part of that change so we're not left behind again in this new cycle and, like you said, this new era of college athletics. To kind of wrap it up here, looking to the future again, as the House settlement was granted that preliminary approval by the judge, what do you see the future of NIL looking like? Do you think there's going to be major regulatory changes or additional NCAA guidelines from just your experience in this landscape, being on the collective side of things and being very much so a forward thinker of college athletics landscape? What do you think the future of NIL looks like?
Sure. So reading the tea leaves a little bit, I think we're going to try and do a small scale version of what we do in pro sports. So you're already starting to hear things like salary caps and general managers and the stuff that we're used to in North American pro sports. We're going to start to see that go into, at a minimum, college football, men's college basketball, and likely women's college basketball. And I pull them out because I think those three are different. And again, they're different because the economics of them are different. And the economics of them are different because they have large TV media contracts, whereas other sports are starting to have contracts, but we're talking billions and billions of dollars every year. Okay. So what I like to say is it may be amateur sports, but it's professional money. And so maybe if it's professional money, then we start to treat it more like professional sports. So we're going to see, I think eventually we're going to stop talking about NIL because NIL is a catch-all term. It's really just legalese. It really just means, can you profit as an individual from your intellectual property or not? That's what it means. In fact, we all have NIL, right? And we can profit from our NIL or not, or we can't, right? So that's what's going on here. I don't think we need to keep talking about NIL in 5 or 10 years. We're going to be talking about, okay, we professionalize college sports, right? And, how did the GM do this offseason when they worked the transfer portal, and how did they spend their funds appropriately? And, this quarterback, what are the rankings in terms of how much quarterbacks are making in college football? Or what are the rankings in terms of what the top men's and women's basketball players are making? All of that stuff is going to start to be organized and professionalized because the fact of the matter is it's all about these media contracts, right? And the Big Ten and the SEC and whoever else survives realignment, they need to deliver on these media contracts, right? And they will figure out a way to do that. And if it means they're going to have to cut into players and spend, 3% of what they make every year on these contracts, they'll do it. If I were the players, I would argue for more than 3% of however many billions of dollars these conferences and these institutions are making from ESPN and CBS and NBC and so forth. But we'll see how that plays out. That's my overall comment. Now, will there be some negatives? Yes. Unfortunately, there will, because, again, the economics of Olympic sports or sports that aren't tied to a media contract are going to be difficult to sort out. Okay? I don't know what the answers are. But, again, there's what I wish would happen, and then there's the reality of the economics of the situation. And we'll see, but there's going to be some difficult decisions, and there may be some very, very, challenging moments for folks making these decisions at these institutions, because can you really afford to sacrifice, the money that goes into your football program over, a men's or women's sport that has been going on for a long time, but ultimately is a loss leader for your institution? Again, difficult, challenging, but we know what really drives these decisions and is, okay, are we increasing our revenue for the institution or not?
Perfectly said. I totally agree. Well, John, that's all that we have here today. Thank you so much for your time and knowledge. I remember our conversation in DC when I had first met you, and it was honestly a conversation that really pushed me to get something off the ground with my own interest in NIL. So thank you for your impact on me just personally. But I think I speak for both Fernando and I when I say we learned so much from you today, and we just really appreciate it.
Well, Elise, Fernando, thank you for doing what you're doing and being, part of the solution, part of that next generation of leaders. And I think you'll do a ton of great work educating and empowering your peers and the people who come after us. And I wish you well. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much. We talked about this again before recording. We had said probably not over 45 minutes, and it became our longest episode just because you have so much great information, and I truly, truly enjoyed this. And again, I'll just say this for context to our listeners. I really do appreciate your time where all three of us are in different time zones. And I think we can tell by the backgrounds and the lighting of where we're all at. So thank you so much for your time. We truly do appreciate it. But for everybody that watched on YouTube or listened on Spotify, thank you guys so much. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. If you're on Spotify, please follow the podcast. That is it for this episode, and we will see you all next Monday.
Bye.